Our conversation today is with Andrew Halverson and Jeremy Clement from Ellis Construction. As the construction intensifies in church, and we're providing updates and things, and we'll try to do that maybe in one of these conversations with some of the folks who are involved in the actual construction at some point. But I thought, first of all, it might be good to step back a little bit to how this all began with the design process that has now culminating with the construction in church. And so Andrew and Jeremy are people that many of our parishioners have met already in the introductory meetings that we held in the spring and summer of last year, introducing the plan. So we want to step back even before that. Maybe to begin, Andrew, first of all, identify your titles or what your roles are at Ellis. You want to go first, Andrew?
You bet. Well, Father, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you about this great project. And quite honestly, hello, good afternoon, good morning, or good night, depending on what time your parishioners are watching this.
Hey, all of those. I
would imagine it could be 3 o'clock in the morning for some, by all means. But really, thank you for getting a chance to be able to share our views and really our reflections on the entire process. It's been great. As Father said, my name is Andrew Halverson. I'm the Executive Vice President and co-owner here at Ellis Construction, and I'm also serving as the project executive for this project.
And I am Jeremy Clement, and I am the architect for this project.
The one who had the imagination.
Well, one of many.
One of many. So Andrew, tell us about Ellis Construction.
Sure.
I think it has a fascinating story.
Well, I appreciate that. We were founded in 1932 by 4 Swedish immigrants during the height of the Great Depression. So we are celebrating our 90th year in business this year, and it's really a wonderful time for us to reflect on the roots actually of Ellis. They were masons. They had a wonderful trade and a great skill as they immigrated. Carlson, Anderson, Peterson, and Olson were 4 Swedish immigrants that came over from Sweden directly in the early 30s. As the company progressed, it really started as Ellis Stone Construction Company. And even many in Wausau would remember we had an office in Wausau for many years, but we were referred to as Ellis Stone for a very, very long time. And only about 6 or 7 years ago, we transitioned into a doing business as approach to our title being Ellis Construction. The derivation of Ellis Stone really is there's no Ellis family. There was no Mr. Ellis Stone. There was a small town just east of Stevens Point called Ellis, where the founders leased a quarry, which was about 10 acres, where they started cutting sandstone, or what was known as Ellis stone. As they advanced, they did significant amounts of masonry for churches, schools, really. So the religious connection to Catholicism in particular, and the number of Catholic churches that Ellis has done really ranks probably 70 or 80 that we've touched throughout Wisconsin, including the Cathedral of the Workman St. Joseph in La Crosse, the home diocesan cathedral. So we really started as specifically a masonry company as we advanced through the 40s and 50s. And in 1951, the first general building contract was awarded to Ellis, which was for the Wood County Highway facility in Wisconsin Rapids. And as we advanced through the 50s and 60s, the company continued to grow, really establishing stronger roots as a general contractor. We started our design build services in the late 70s and early 80s, meaning that we have our architects right here on staff. We design the entire project as well as construct the project. So as we move forward through the 80s, 90s, and today, we really find ourselves as a moderate-sized construction management firm, general contractor, as well as design builder as we advance. So myself, Eric Carlson, we represent the officers of the corporation. There are 4 other partners: Steve Chizzo, our Director of Architectural Services; Tim Kreft, Brandon Coles, and Patrick Pierce, estimating and project management, respectively. So it's a great team. We each have our own areas of focus, and we're just thrilled to be a part of this project, kind of taking us right back to our connection to Catholicism specifically, and churches as well.
Well, and you have a connection to St. Anne's that I'll get to in a moment, but Eric Carlson, who you mentioned, is a grandson of one of those founders, correct?
Exactly right. And Helgi Carlson, our current president's grandfather, was the head mason on St. Joseph the Workman Cathedral in La Crosse.
Okay.
Helgi gained national notoriety specifically because of the masonry work associated with that cathedral. So we're very, very proud of that history.
Cool. And you and Ellis did the renovation, the construction work of the 1986 renovation at St. Anne's.
Yep, that's exactly right. In fact, as you well remember, Father, here in our main conference room, we had photos of that project here on our walls for many, many years. So it was a unique project. It was very interesting at the time based on the design. But as we all know, designs have their period in time, and times change. And I think
well, and other additions and things warrant changes or modifications as well. And that's kind of what happened here. Was the addition of the font made a huge impact on what we would do going forward. So
it sure did.
Yes.
Yep. And so that's a good lead in then to talk a little bit about our project. Andrew, you were earlier before we started recording, you gave kind of a review of the timeline. Can you just, we started actually in the fall of 2019 with our conversation.
We did. And what's amazing is obviously COVID got in the way of all of us. And we even had to stop for a second and remember as to whether that was the fall of 2020 or the fall of 2019. But the initial conversations actually go back that far. They began in the fall of 2019, progressed through the winter and into the spring of 2020. And we more than likely had, I believe, our first presentation to the parish pre-COVID to be able to share those initial conceptual renderings with the design committee and others. And of course, COVID hit immediately at that time, just a few weeks, in fact, thereafter. And it gave all of us a pause. The project really went on hold for many, many months. In fact, I don't think, Father, that we really circled back around until early 2021 to start these conversations again, if memory serves me correct.
If even, it might have been almost a year because I think we met again in like March or April of 2021.
Sure.
And right, you had presented to the pastoral and finance councils. We offered some input to tweak things, and we had a meeting scheduled in like March 23rd or something like that. I was going to go see the bishop that week, and then everything just ended and was just put on hold for a year, essentially.
It was, exactly. Yeah. And obviously the world certainly changed a great deal in between, but it was so wonderful to be able to get back together and pick up where we left off and really continue the reimagining process for what is going to be just an unbelievable, wonderfully worship-centric area once we get through the process. And I think that was what was so wonderful, is to have this reimagining became one of the first projects that we started back up post-COVID for us, also here with Ellis. Yeah. So the excitement was certainly there, not only in wanting to get back to a sense of normalcy and have projects move forward as they had for so many years prior, but it really was wonderful because it allowed us to see what really could be in that environment. And I think that's what's most exciting about this project, is the way in which it really reshapes the entire nave.
Mm-hmm. And so that all began with the reimagining team that we had here in the parish. We visited different churches. We first of all began by studying the bishop's document, Built of Living Stones, looked at the ideals that are put forward, looked at the situation or the reality that we have in place. So obviously we weren't talking about any additional construction. It was working with what we have and looking at what was done, looking at the origins of our church in 1950, what was done in 1986, the addition of the font in 2000 or 2001, and then figuring out how to make sense of all that. And that's where you come in, Jeremy. So maybe you can recall, I mean, how we began this process and how you began to do the work of reimagining our church.
Yeah, and it really all starts with yourself and the parish, the direction that you had given, and the principles that you had laid out early on, to know where we were headed. And from there, it's really a matter of just listening to the client and trying to essentially just put their thoughts into the design. So sometimes people aren't necessarily able to easily convey what they're looking for, but that's where architecture is almost a little bit like a therapist in a way, where you have to understand what the people are looking for for that end product.
You know, the old adage, God gave us two ears and one mouth for a reason, Father. And in this case, sitting back and listening is so imperative for the design process to really fulfill what the maximized program is and what the goals are of the owner. We were just at a potential client, Jeremy and I, just a couple days ago, and there were three folks that we were talking to, and two of them apologized because they almost felt uncomfortable about the way in which they were trying to describe what they wanted to see. And what's really one of the most vital elements, I think, of the design process is being able to hear some of those core words that are used by individuals to design, or at least to project what they feel the design should look like, how they articulate what their vision is, and listening to those key points. Always light, bright, white, use of natural light, and how that affects what the space eventually turns into. And in our case, what I'm most proud of, honestly, of this entire project, and everyone will get a chance to see it certainly once it's finished, but anyone that reads through what the guiding principles are as it relates to the foundation of our goals for this design, anyone that stands back and looks at what we will have accomplished when this is built will see each and every one of those prioritized and how we made sure that everyone was together, the focus of the altar, and specifically the crucifix, the continuity of the space, and especially the processional importance of knowing what those processions need to feel like vis-a-vis the corpus. I think everyone will be pretty excited about that. I think we accomplished that.
As well as making sure that we are addressing those accessibility issues, and making sure that, you know, as the congregation ages, that they are still able to enjoy the space and not feel as though they're kind of stuck in a corner or something, that they have full access.
Exactly.
And those obviously were priorities of the project from the beginning. One of the things you had said, Andrew, that I was just going to respond to, and now I can't remember what it was. Oh, well, in terms of just the engagement of the font and the altar. So that was probably the primary goal that we had, was to accomplish that and to identify the primary focus of the altar as you entered the church. So the font is right there if you're coming in the main entrance, but then to recognize the altar as the primary focus beyond the font. And I think clearly the plan and the product will do that. Go ahead, Andrew.
Point of a conversational piece that I wanted to bring up here today as we're talking about this. I think a lot of the parishioners know what the original church looked like, but I would imagine many of them don't.
Right.
And I think a lot of folks don't realize that the original church entered from the east. The altar and the worship space was on the west side, where the font is today. And as you look at how those additions were placed to the west for the main entry area, as well as the church offices, you really created, in essence, a complete, well, at least a 90-degree turn.
Yeah.
But it really changed the feel of the space, because the space still wanted to almost look and feel as if it should be oriented that way, but yet it really wasn't. So the main entrance, of course, with folks coming into the church from the west, progressing past the baptismal font, but yet having to take that sharp 90-degree turn to orient themselves to the altar, really created a disjointed element to the space. And I think we've definitely done our best to change that.
Well, and as I said in some of the presentations that we had, that the construction of the font in 2000, that addition, and then the font being placed where it is, that really was a game changer and would determine what would happen going forward. Because again, if the altar is going to be the primary emphasis beyond the font, then that kind of makes it clear how that would be structured.
It was indeed cast in stone, Father, that is for sure.
Yeah, the font is not movable, as we know, or at least, well, not within our means by any way. One of the distinctive features of the new space, the new design of the church, will be the cross at the east end, with kind of these How do you describe where the windows are in that, Jeremy? Would they be framed with it? The windows frame the cross in a way?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, I would say they frame it in a way, I mean, they kind of support or accentuate the cross. And where that originated.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted you to tell about. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
Yeah, so a lot of parishioners may not even know this because of the main entry being on the west, with a secondary entry being on the south. There weren't a lot of people that were probably used to coming in on the east, but outside the building on the east end, there is a stone cross. So the idea then became pulling that cross into the building, and then it really became more of a question of what do we want that cross to be, whether it be stone, wood, and it kind of mimics that exterior, pulling it inside, and then you have that, the framing and accentuation of the cross by the small stained glass windows, which otherwise were hidden.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much underutilized for the beauty that they really can create in their current state.
Mhm. And you could already begin to see, so now that loft area is removed, so you can begin to see where that cross will be and how the windows will frame that. The windows are covered by plywood, so you can't see them, but you can imagine how that's going to look. And what I love about it is that it brings in that original concrete cross from the exterior and brings that inside. So again, it's not like it's not that cross is inside, but you're helping us kind of recreate that image from the very initial structure of the church, as part of this new version, if you will, of the church.
Yeah, it's a nice reflection of the original church in this latest iteration.
You bet.
Right. What would you say were the greatest challenges thus far in this process?
Well, I think it's obviously cost goes without saying, right? Budget adherence and making sure that we're able to balance costing of the project, but with the unique intent as it relates to aesthetics. That is always a challenge. In fact, over the last year and a half, it's become one of the most aggressive challenges that we have with any project these days. Budget was always a concern for every project for the last 100 years. The last year and a half has presented lead time concerns as well as overall pricing increases that really created a challenge when you wanted to try and incorporate slightly more unique finishes. Most of the time, unique finishes, of course, are going to be coupled with higher prices. That was certainly one of the more unique concerns. However, finding a way to make sure that we could add light into what is currently a very dark space. You wouldn't think that naturally, but of course, all the parishioners that have celebrated in this space previously realized that even on the brightest of days, that is a very, very dark environment. And by maximizing the use of bright colors, by using a higher K value LED light fixture for the new environment, really will, I think, create a wonderfully well-lit space. So that was certainly one of the challenges. But we also have a very strange ceiling. I will say strange ceiling because it is not.
In the past, you've called it distinctive, Andrew.
Distinctive, yes, very, very
Yes.
distinctive. Maybe strange is a bit heavy. But ultimately, what's unique about it is that it isn't centered in the room. And it doesn't create a sense of symmetry, which is always an architectural challenge. Do you use the center point or do you keep your focal point off-centered? And in this case, the corpus and the cross is indeed off-center because it looks, I shouldn't say that. It is actually centered for the aisle,
Right.
but has almost the optical illusion because of those two varying heights of the ceiling that it isn't, which was a unique challenge. And within that false ceiling, the HVAC elements of it needed to be watched fairly carefully as well, to ensure that we've got quality air distribution for the new space. So in saving money by not removing that structure, it did create a little bit more of a unique approach for the engineering team to make sure that the HVAC distribution is going to be correct for the space. Those would be my reflections.
Yeah,
don't know about yours.
And I mean, regarding the ceiling, obviously it is unique, but I think that we have addressed some things by not focusing on the asymmetry of the ceiling and really pushing the symmetry of the space, as well as bringing in some larger pendant fixtures, light fixtures, which will bring down that apparent height. And I think will lead the eye to more directly toward the altar, versus looking up and looking at the ceiling.
Right. You mentioned how dark the church was before, Andrew, but I think once you're familiar with a space and it's where you go to mass every Sunday, you don't notice that. It just becomes the norm. Because even now, when we're having mass in McKillop Hall, a couple of people have observed how much brighter it is there. I mean, you just didn't think about it in church before, because that's just how it always was.
Sure.
I've told this to people before. Sometimes I didn't know I knew my one week, for example, my mom and dad were there, and I knew they were there, but I couldn't see them. They were in one of these shadows that existed back in the day. So anyway, probably the biggest construction part of this, at least to this point, is the removing of the loft, which has now been completed for the most part. So
Yes.
what would be the next big step in terms of construction, Jeremy or Andrew? That will happen now?
Yeah, from a demolition perspective, you're absolutely right, Father. The removal of that choir loft absolutely was thus far one of the greatest substantive construction challenges. It was not structural in that it in and of itself was not supporting any of the church, the superstructure of the church, but there was a lot of concrete that was a part of that particular loft. So it needed solid planning. We needed to make sure that it was going to be removed accordingly as we advance. So that certainly is done now, and we're excited about that.
Well, and that had to be removed, like kind of, I don't know, piece by piece, but it had to be removed in such a way that it didn't destroy the structure of the building around it, right? Which is a little
exactly. Once we got close to the edges, yes, it needed to be quite surgical in terms of how the demolition was executed.
Yeah. So. Good. Well, anything else that you want to add just in terms of the process that brought us to this point?
Well, I think that anytime you undertake a project like this, where it is very personal to folks, you can get a lot of strong opinions, different ways, which of course we had, which is normal. But I think that we were able to really pull everyone together, and at the end come up with something that I think everyone is really going to be happy and proud of once that.
I agree. I think
finished.
the end result and the design that we see in front of us today really best symbolizes that no one got everything, everyone got something. And I think that's probably one of the best ways to look at it, in that the space really was done collaboratively. We knew that certain opinions weren't able to be brought forth because of price in some cases. Some of the personal opinions that were expressed may have not allowed us, or wouldn't have allowed us to maximize those principles that we wanted to see, the guiding principles of the design that we brought to the project. And I think once folks were able to stand back and see some of that, but also be able to visualize what we really did, Father, as you know, and as folks who may not know, who are at home watching this video, is that we really leveraged the use of three-dimensional design technology. So the renderings and the concepts that we were able to change real time with the committee allowed us to consider so many of those fairly sensitive topics very early on in the process. And by folks being able to visualize what our suggestions were, real time and much, much sooner than they would have previously, I think allowed us to progress through some of those decisions quite efficiently as well.
So, cool. Yeah. And I think, right, it's a complicated process. There are ideals that we really couldn't, fudge on too much. And we had a structure that we had to work within. So, and the cost limitations. So I think you're right, Jeremy. People will be very happy with. I hope people will be very happy. I look forward to being very happy with the church that we have when this is done. We should mention also Sua Chang has been part of this design process, an important component, or important player
Very
in this process as well.
Was and really is our primary design specialist for our three-dimensional design software. And Sua did a wonderful job, and also was the primary contact on the finish selection for the interiors. He really did a good job.
Right. Yeah, we'll talk in another conversation about all the choices and things like that. It's just mind-boggling. And I need to talk to Jeremy about one of those things when we're done with this conversation about lights in church. So we'll get to that. Your final comments about how, the appreciation for the finished product and things like that. I want to conclude with two comments from two of our parishioners who are in their 90s. You talked, Andrew, about how we've kind of moved the church. We've gone in this progression around the space. One of our parishioners, who's 95, I believe she says, "I wonder if I'll live long enough to make the change once more." And I said, "No, you won't." I said, "I would love for you to live that long, but it ain't going to happen. So just keep living. Just keep living." Then another parishioner who's in her 90s, she has sent us a wonderful note every month since March of 2020, since COVID started. And I just want to share her note from January. She said, "The vision I see in our new place of worship is amazing. My prayer is that God will keep me on this earth long enough so that I will really be able to see it completed."
Oh,
So,
that's one.
Isn't that great? That's a good point to end on. Jeremy and Andrew, thank you very much. I hope that both of you or others can join us just to talk about this project some more and kind of the nitty-gritty of the construction phase as we move along. But thank you very much for your time today.
Well, our pleasure. You're very welcome. And thank you. And maybe more important than anything, to all the parishioners that are watching, from all of us at Ellis, thank you so very much for allowing us to serve you in this way, to be able to leave a legacy on the Wausau community that will last for 50 to 100 years. So thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you.